Welcome to Glitch Cube. We're a gaming podcast, and each week we take a deeper look into the art of video games. I'm Christian.
I'm Chris.
And we are opting actually out of doing a weekly update because we wanted to just jump right into this wonderful topic here. Last month, I'm sure some of you might remember, we took a deeper look into Team Id, the creators of Doom, and we wanted to kind of keep that going and make this a monthly routine. So this month, we are actually looking at Team Ico, which is one of my favorites by far. It's a small studio for sure, and they have a very small bank of games, only 3 to be exact, 4th in the making. But the amount of work that has been put into these games and the amount of inspiration that can be drawn from them is unfathomable. They have done so much for the gaming community by just changing the way we think about games and how we design them and what we include in them or what we don't include in them, which we will go into later on in this episode. So before we jump in and before we really get into some of the details, I wanted to ask you, Chris, what's your experience with Team Ico and some of their games?
So for me, every time I look at the cover of Ico, it reminds me of this random issue of EGM, or Electric Gaming Monthly, for the younger crowd or people that don't know that era of magazines.
What's a magazine?
It's a it was. I don't know if it's still around. Actually, I'm not too smart on the gaming magazines anymore. But there always was an ad for Ico, and it was just so cool looking. I'm like, remember, this is like the era of like PS2, like just starting out. So like these kind of spacious, desolate backdrops were just like amazing compared to like what we had on the PlayStation 1 and 64, if you count anything good looking on that console. But I remember seeing those and I'm like, damn, this game looks good. Like, I need to get it. And weirdly enough, I didn't get it right away. Like, I ended up getting it, I think it was Greatest Hits. I don't know. I remember getting it for like around $20.
Yeah.
And I mean, the length of the game definitely matched that price better, but the experience I had with it was crazy. Like, it's so empty, but it's empty in a good way because you're not distracted.
Right.
And I'm going to reference like a newer game real quick because it's like when you play a lot of newer games, there's so many things thrown at you to try and expand the game, right? For me, like I look at open world games and how they throw like 50 different collectibles to get at you and all this kind of stuff, or even like adventure games nowadays. There's always like some dumb thing that it's optional, but it's there. And a dummy like me is going to be like, well, I want 100% this, so I'm getting it. And it's distracting me from the story.
Right.
And in turn, I lose my immersion in the story. And with Ico, I mean, also Shadow of the Colossus too, but it's just straight to the point. You're getting through the story. You don't really know what's going on. I remember when I played it, I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like, I didn't understand it, but it was cool. And it was just beautiful. Like, the PlayStation 2 era, it was such a jump from the PlayStation 1. And, I mean, most generation jumps are pretty big. But growing up at a time where 3D looked terrible and seeing it grow into something where they're not totally blocky, they actually look like human beings, was crazy. And seeing Ico made me really excited for what was to come in games. Shadow of the Colossus came out, and all my friends went crazy about it. Honestly, I didn't even think about it at the time. I was like, oh, this looks kind of cool. But it was during a time where I was heavily into like JRPGs and just RPGs in general. So I wasn't really into that whole adventuring kind of game. So I kind of ignored it for a bit and figured it was all hype. Finally, I played it maybe like I don't know, 3 years, 4 years after it came out. And I was beating myself up for not playing it sooner. I was so amazed by how the game played. It was so different than anything I ever touched.
Yeah.
And I think it's still very different from anything we have. I'm not a big Monster Hunter fan because I'm terrible at it, but I feel like maybe Monster Hunter is the kind of the closest we got to some of it. I feel like there's another game too, and I can't get the name of it, but I know that it's kind of tackling like big beasts like that. I know God Eater does it too, but
yeah,
nothing's really come close to that because all these other games that have that kind of style of jumping on a huge beast and taking it down are like bottled down by all this extra fluff. Shadow of the Colossus is straight to the point. Like, you have a little bit of story in the beginning, but I mean, it also throws you in that like void of what the hell am I doing here?
Right.
And the thing I loved about that game is that it's so open that you could do anything. The only way that guides you is your sword that lights up, and it's crazy. Like, I couldn't believe the imagination that went into every Colossus. It's wild.
Yeah.
And how each one was so different. It was crazy. And I think they were really ahead of their time with that style. I mean, that game was mentioned. I remember watching this old Adam Sandler movie. I mean, not old, it's in the 2000s, but it was called Reign Over Me. And I remember it basically was a story of Sandler being this, if I remember, kind of like a burnout, but he was just depressed. And he basically equated everything from Shadow of the Colossus to things in real life.
Yep.
And it was weird because when he would go to the store to do something, he would imagine in his head like he's taking on this Colossus. And it's weird, but that movie made me really appreciate the game more because I'm like, oh my God, like it's kind of, you could use that as like, oh, this is like I'm tackling something in real life. It's weird.
Well,
it's really weird.
That's what depression feels like. It feels like you're fighting a massive beast, where even such a mundane task like going to the grocery store becomes such a colossal event. And like I was looking at Reign Over Me as well, and I remember watching that too, and just remembering those small moments and just thinking like, this is so powerful and wonderful. Yeah, it was great.
Plus, I was like, dude, Adam Sandler can be a good actor, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
Other than that, those two games had a decent impact on me. I think like it's definitely had a bigger impact on a lot more other people. But and Last Guardian, I have it. I haven't really gone far, and I think I played maybe for like an hour or two. My wife beat it though, and she really liked it. I don't know. For me, when it came out, I was super excited about it, and then she hogged it, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just watch it. And then I got distracted, and she beat it, and I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of cool, and I just haven't touched it since. But talking about it and doing some research on it the past week, I kind of want to jump into it and see what it's all about, because the design behind it and some of the things they did with it actually sound kind of cool, and now I want to see them in action.
Right.
But that's enough about me rambling about it. I know you are a little more passionate for this team, and I kind of want to hear your experiences with them.
Yeah, I mean, so Team Ico, Ico was actually one of the first games that I got early on when I started playing games. And what immediately drew me to it was the cover. Now, unfortunately, I had the North American cover. And as a kid, I didn't know that there was a different cover out there at all. But the American release had a picture of actual Ico on the front. And I just loved the aesthetic of this character with his horns and everything. I don't know, like everything about it drew me to him. And I think it was that childlike wonder that gets imbued into these games, and like the Miyazaki films as well. It just felt like you felt the whimsy from it, even though it wasn't the original rendition of what the release was supposed to be, right? Um, so like playing those games as a kid, I didn't realize how much those games would inspire a lot of my interests when I was growing up. Like when it came to a lot of the different design theories and stuff like that, I didn't start thinking about that until I started going to school for it, and then realizing that a lot of my design decisions or a lot of the decisions that I made when like buying games or finding ones that I actually enjoyed came from those titles.
Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned the fact that a lot of games have, a bunch of side quests and extra things thrown at you. And that's equated to kitchen sink design, right? Where it just
Yeah.
everything is thrown at the player. There's like sensory overload. Like imagine playing Assassin's Creed. And when you see the HUD, you have so much going on. You have your quest, you have your target, you have a compass, you have button controls on like when you get walk near something and how to properly interact with it. There's just so much, and then you can go into like the assassin vision and you get even more sensory overload and just so much going
Mm-hmm.
on the screen. But the problem with that is that that takes away the player out of it, where now I'm not this character walking down the street. I am someone playing this character, right? Like it feels more like a simulation, and it removes the player from the experience. Whereas now Ueda, who is the designer for Team Ico, I don't think we actually mentioned that really fully yet, but so he coined this term called design by subtraction. And it's something that I have really come to admire. Just to have I guess, the confidence to actually design a game this way, where they, like, if you look at Ico, he actually spoke on this a lot, where Ico had a very complex combat system. It had health bars, it had side quests, it had NPCs. There was a village, and I believe there was an island that you could then sail to get more items as well.
Huh.
That was all in the original game. And then he realized his story was getting lost. And the one of the big things that Ueda really hates in games is repeating dialogue, and I believe it was just expansive side quests or just unnecessary knowledge, right? And by repeating dialogue, what I meant was like when you talk to an NPC in the street and they have the same dialogue tree and they just keep repeating it over and over and over again, that
Mm-hmm.
breaks your immersion completely, right? Then you're reminded, I'm in a video game. So what did Ueda do? He removed all NPCs from the game. He took them out right away. And then he started looking at the environment, and he started really just paring away at his own game and all these things that he's made until he was left with this core concept, the original idea, and all the decisions that were made to stay in the game, at least, all back and strengthen the title more. So I think that's such an amazing thing. And that's what, when I look at making a game or something like that, I always ask, what is this doing to my theme? Or even when I'm designing a piece or an artwork, like, what is this doing to my theme? Is the theme lost? Am I just adding extra fluff just to add it because this other game did it? Or this other artist put in a bunch of extra things into their artwork? Is it actually necessary? Does it help tell the story? So, those ideas of design by subtraction really reign true to me, and they really have inspired a lot of the choices that I've made. And Ico was the first game that really brought that to my attention. And the other thing that these games have done for me as well is taught me about ebb and flow.
Mm.
And Colossus is a perfect example of this. So when you have a game that's too much high notes, it becomes overwhelming, and the reward system becomes like not exciting anymore, and you start losing interest, right? So it's just
Yeah.
like win, 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 crazy sounds, like crazy sound effects, like boom, like a lot of just high energy for too long becomes overwhelming and exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
So I forgot where I read this, but I feel like there's a study done in Shadow of the Colossus was the one that they were looking at, where they measured a player's heartbeat while playing this game. So while you're playing the game, if you haven't played it, there's a lot of there's a lot of vast emptiness while you're getting to the next Colossus. There's no enemies on the map. There's not really much to interact with. You just have your horse, the sword, the light, and the environment around you. So you're able to just roam freely around the world, which is a really cool idea. And it's one of the first open world games where like I actually felt like I just wanted to explore for exploring's sake. Now, the reason for these long passages in time is because while you're fighting the Colossus, the music kicks up and you're facing down this giant beast that's in front of you and it just towers over you in comparison. So you go through this crazy interaction with them that where you're fighting the beast. Then when you finally beat them, you get transported back to the main shrine and then you have to go on this long trek back to the next Colossus, right? So while you're fighting that beast, your heart rate is spiking and you're hitting this point of like extreme excitement, major tension, and you feel that tension as you're gripping onto the Colossus's fur and trying to climb up, and you're watching your grip strength fade away and you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to make it? Then when you finally beat the boss, what happens is that you have, like during your journey to the next one, your heart rate is actually able to lower again to a point of calm and serenity. And it once it reaches that point in calm and serenity, that's about how long it took you to get to the next Colossus. So you get to have this nice ebb and flow of high peaks and then really low valleys, but it creates a sense of balance, even with the way that they present that information to you. And it's such a genius thing. And it's something that's never like, as a player, you're not going to really think about this. But as a designer, it's something that you strive for is how do you keep a player engaged? And it's not by like spoon feeding them reward system after reward system. It's about how you think about the human body reacts to these certain stimuli, whether it's a negative stimuli or a positive one, right? Like those are the things that you have to take into account when designing a game and just creating a sense of balance in general.
I didn't really think about the whole like valleys and the balance of it. Like when I played it, like I got it in the sense that, you know, you relax and then it goes back up. And thinking about that now, I can't really think of that many games that have that balance like that perfectly.
No,
And
it's a
how
hard
you
one to
brought it up
do. Yeah.
with like Assassin's Creed and stuff. Like I just beat Valhalla
Mhm.
like yesterday. And it didn't have that balance. Like there was definitely times where it was all too ramped up or times where there was just nothing.
Mhm.
And that immersion was gone. And how you were talking about like NPCs saying the same thing. It's like I see that so often, especially in like AAA games where you think may be able to spend maybe a little more time with fixing those kind of things, right?
Mhm.
But they don't. And it's wild, this subtraction idea, because it makes total sense. And it's weird how I feel most studios don't try to do that.
Mhm.
I feel like they just want to over fluff us with content, which I get. It brings more money to the hours put in. And I think, especially with modern games, that's a big detractor in the sense that they want people to get their $60 worth in the game.
Yeah.
So they have to add all this extra stuff in there to make it longer. And it sucks because I look at a game like Ico or Shadow of the Colossus, I'm willing to play a game that's maybe 6-8 hours long if it's done well like that.
Yeah.
Especially with Colossus, where it's the balance is perfect and it's good. It doesn't have to have a deep story. It's worth it. Is it worth like say $70? I mean, it's debatable.
Yeah.
If it's as good as Shadow of the Colossus, I'd say yeah, it'd be worth, 60. But a lot of these games nowadays, it's like it's too much content that I'm not gonna do. And that's another thing, is that with these older games, you were able to do everything in it, basically, which was cool. You got to explore the world. You got to see everything. These new games, they throw so much at you. I would say maybe 70% of the people that play these games won't do everything.
Right.
Why do I need a game with like over 200 hours of content when most of the content's the same?
Yeah.
And doesn't even feel connected to the story.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd rather play a game like Ico, where in late game you can look down at a different like courtyard from up high in the castle and remember, oh yeah, that's where I did this, this, and this. Which is, to me, that's more impactful, and it just really helps build that world and expand it out even further. And it just creates that connection that you're looking for. And I think the connection is worth much more than just extra fluff of side quests and random like collectibles and things like that. I'd rather have an actual human connection to something, or learn something about myself that I would have never thought about, or have a way to get this medium to then correlate to my real life. Like, that's more impactful to me, and I feel like that's where it makes it 100% worth $60 for me, at least. Like, I would buy Colossus again today, 100%, and I have multiple times. So
imagine if they do like a 4K, like
I'm on it.
Final Fantasy remake style graphics, but done it like
just don't touch the game, just touch the graphics.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd love it 100%.
Oh my god, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, that'd be insane. Hey everybody, just jumping in real quick. Just want to say, first of all, thank you for continuing listening, and obviously you're enjoying it because you've reached the middle of our episode. But before we continue on, we just wanted to remind you all that if you are truly enjoying what you're hearing and you want to learn some more about us, you can find us on social medias, and we have links in our description, and you can find me and all the drawings that I'm doing on Instagram at Kieran, and that's Keuran. What about you, Chris?
You can find me at Sloppy Cube on Instagram. That's Sloppy and Cube at the end of it. I do all retro games or just games in general, so if that's your thing, check me out. You can also message me about ideas and anything, because I love talking.
Yep. We both really enjoy talking, obviously, because we are recording a podcast. So if you want to join in the conversation, please reach out to us on the Discord, and let's get right back into this episode.
I think for me, when I was younger, I compared Ico and Shadow of the Colossus a lot to like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, because to me the hero kind of looked like Link.
Yeah, I could see that.
So I was like, oh, this is a boring version of Ocarina of Time. I mean, I still enjoyed my time with these two games, but I felt like they were those artsy kids who thought they were better than the other kids at school. And I mean, in a sense, like, a lot of people look at like Team Ico's games as like art, which they are, but it's on a different pedestal. And when I was younger, I didn't see that. When I was younger, going back to having more fluff, I was more into that because I wanted to play more of this world. Once I got older and I replayed Shadow of the Colossus, I understand what you're saying. Like, I wanted to explore every crevice of this world.
Yeah.
And I mean, now I see it's definitely something. And I really hope their newest game or newer game they're working on captures that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be ideal. And talking about feelings and kind of expanding on that, one of the big things that Ueda wants to impose in his games is the feeling of empathy. And that feeling of empathy is everywhere throughout the game. whether
Mhm.
it's with the interactions with the minimal characters that you do interact with, verbal or whatnot, the Princess Yorda in Ico. You literally have to hold her hand the entire time while to make her traverse through the castle. You don't even have a health bar in that game. Your health is tied to her. If she gets captured,
Mhm.
you lose. So you're taking the player out of just thinking about themselves and actually having to think about someone else. I mean, like even with like holding Yorda's hand, you literally have to hold down a button the entire time in order to accomplish that. Which when I was a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible.
Ugh.
But now looking back at it, it's actually genius where you're forced to do this. Like it's an action that seems like extra. Like
Lifelike.
it's very lifelike where if you were really in that situation, you would be gripping on as hard as you can.
Break their hand by holding on too tight.
Honestly, yeah, 100%, right? And like that's such a beautiful aspect of it and like just creating that sense of empathy within these games. I don't really know many other games that on their own came up with the ideas that were necessary to create that sense of empathy. Like looking at Journey has a really strong sense of it and it's a beautiful title, but it's been quoted as being incredibly heavily inspired by Ueda's work. So if it wasn't for him, then we wouldn't have games like Journey or even Brothers. Brothers was heavily inspired by
Mhm.
that too, and you can feel that in the way that it plays out, where the brothers are interacting with each other. And actually, I want to bring up this quote by Ueda, which I thought was amazing, where it really talks about the idea of empathy within gaming, right? So, there are many mediums you can use to tell a story: movies, novels, and you could say music as well. When you compare games to those other media, what they do better is build empathy. There's a more realistic feeling of presence. They build an atmosphere. So that's also something I am committed to. In this regard, I think games can rival other media to tackle any obstacles to building that empathy. So
Hmm.
it's obvious that what Ueda is trying to do is really, really drive that point home of creating a more humanistic experience for the player. And all those decisions, all the decisions of his gameplays, of the level designs, everything comes right back to that core sense of creating a real human experience. And I think that's what like the whole idea of everything, like the design by subtraction, all of it is how do you boil it down to make this real? How do you really create a sense of immersion and give players actual decisions that mean something and give them actions that really mean something and give them an environment that is a real environment to go through? Like looking at the landscapes that you're able to traverse, like let's say, okay, for instance, Ico, right? That world was first created before it was destroyed with the mindset of a player going through it, right? So that's kind of a weird thing to say. And to let me clarify that a little bit. So Ueda actually designed the castle first, through and through, as if it was a real thing in the world. And the actual designs were inspired heavily by a couple artists. One was Giorgio de Chirico,
Mhm.
and then the other one was Gerard Trignac. And these guys, their artwork is beautiful. But if you look at specifically, if you look at Trignac's art and the way that he creates such vast architecture, then you can
Hmm.
completely see exactly where these design decisions were coming from. Whenever Ueda was making all of the castles and things like that for not just Ico, but for Colossus and everything like that. So what he did was that he first designed these environments with the mindset of actually having people live in them. Then he took it to the distant future where humans are no longer there and not interacting. So then he created decay and things like that and like overgrowth of plant life. And then he took it one step further because he knows that he's making a game in the long run. So what he would do is he would create little small elements of making the player jump around, but how would a player interact with an environment that already exists? So that's where his mindset was going when designing these things. Now, what's different with this way of thinking versus a normal level designer, with normal level design, what you do is you have your start point, your end point, and then what you do in the middle, right? And the what you do in the middle is built up with how do you want the player to traverse to the next stage. And a lot of times a player will have like maybe a new ability like double jump or something like that to get to the next area. So you design elements to then convey that message and get the player comfortable with these new ways of traversing the lands. Now, in doing that, with having the primary focus of the mechanic rather than the environment, what you're doing is then you're bending the environment to the will of the level design itself. And that takes away from the realism of it. So instead of focusing on how the player moved through the environment, he focused on how the environment would react to time and then created levels on the ability of the player itself, right? So it's kind of like a hard concept to really grasp. And it seems like it's almost like you're talking about the same thing, just in different senses. But it's true. No matter what, you are designing a level for a game, and there are certain constraints like movement and how high something can jump or if they can climb or not. But when you look at it from a standpoint of a realistic way of approaching it, of okay, well, I want the player, like let's say the door is blocked, but maybe the player can traverse the wall. Well, luckily, this wall has some protrusions with the way the stone pokes out of the wall that are about as high as the player can jump. So maybe there's some decay, but like looking at it where, like, if you're a real person trying to get into this castle, you're going to look at different elements of like, okay, well, how am I going to climb this now? Right. Or how else am I going to get in? So he used the real world environment to create those situations. So I think that's a really interesting way of approaching level design and just imbuing everything into it and just bringing it back to that whole human experience of just making it a real thing, of just making it like a real, finding out these ways of doing things and accomplishing your goal become very real and grounded in the world that he's created.
Yo, I'm in love with this, like, all of Gerard Trignac's artwork. Like, it's just, oh
It's
my
stunning,
God.
right? It's stunning.
How did I not know this person before?
Yeah.
Like, beautiful. Wow. And I can see the inspiration.
Yeah.
Like, it's wild, dude. I love this kind of like black and art look too.
Yeah, it's stunning, but it's crazy vast worlds where you can feel life in them.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel people, like there's certain shots of like these bridges. You can feel people walking across these bridges, but no one's there in these pictures. In Trignac's pictures, there's no people whatsoever. It's just the architecture itself. And some of the small details that you might notice are that the world is actually very decrepit and nature is starting to creep back in. So Gerard painted a lot of dystopian imagery where is crazy, vast, intricate architecture in which nature has started to slowly creep back in. So
I love that.
It's beautiful. His stuff is beautiful. So don't worry. In the show notes, I'll make sure to include not images, but the names of these artists so that you guys can check them out on your own time because they are phenomenal. Definitely, I would recommend looking at them because the sense of life you get from just these stagnant pictures are just amazing, just purely amazing.
Something interesting I found too was, did you see the idea for Ico? Like how he came up with the idea of it?
No.
So he said some of it was from a manga, but his biggest inspiration actually came from a commercial where it was a woman and a child holding hands and walking in the woods.
Interesting.
That's how he got the idea for Ico. I was like, it's a very like broad stretch.
Well, talk about a man that pulls inspiration from the most random places. So if he pulled it from a commercial, like he was asked in an interview once, like what inspires him, whether it's other games, novels, music, other forms of media, like what does Ueda absorb in order to create these amazing worlds for us? And he kind of laughed about it in the interview, but he said that what really inspires him is movie trailers, not movies. I
could see that.
He likes movie trailers because in the trailer you get the whole feeling of the movie in like a 2-minute snippet. And he is so obsessed with like breaking things down to the core element where the movie isn't what inspired him. It's the trailer of how they want to convey their message that inspires his work. So like that's funny. And that makes sense now that that small commercial can inspire such an interesting idea.
I mean, when you think about trailers and commercials, they have to convey the whole product in something less than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's when you can tell between a trailer if it's great or if it's trash. And I could see, picking inspiration because I've definitely seen some trailers for movies and even games where it's just like, whoa, like this is on another level compared to other things in the media.
Yeah.
It was interesting reading how Ico was in production for 4 years. Like it was originally going to be released on the original PlayStation, but then they realized they couldn't handle it. And I'm trying to think, like, how would it look if it was on the original PlayStation? Like, it would be, I could see in kind of like a Parasite Eve kind of graphic-wise, but I'm glad that they waited for the PS2 to push it out because it really took advantage of the emotion engine and the graphics and everything, and it looks great.
Well, that's a common thread with the Ico games. And what's crazy to think about, like, really drill this into your mind, people. So this company was made in 1995. It's now 2021. And how many games have they developed and released? 3. So that's insane. That's insane to think about that. Like this studio is still around and still heavily loved by so many and backed by huge development like Sony, where they've only made 3 games, but they trust Ueda's design principles so much that it doesn't matter how long it takes to make that game. They're going to continue to back it regardless of the fact. And if they decide that they need to go to the next platform to convey their message, well, that's just what happens. So it's just that blows my mind from like a business standpoint. But it's really amazing to see. So
it's interesting how Sony really took a chance on Ueda. Because, I mean, when you look back at his early work, he worked with Warp, which was created by Kenji Ino, which is a topic for another time.
Oh, yeah.
Because that guy is very interesting.
He's weird.
Yeah, he has really weird things. I find it really interesting how he made that game for the deaf. It was called Real Sound. He basically wanted to make a game for... Oh, no, it was for the blind. That's what it was. Games for the blind. And it was an audio adventure game.
Oh, cool.
And he wanted that to be the first. And actually, it got kind of big over there in Japan. And he also wanted to make it where everyone got seeds to plant new life. Like, the dude's interesting. But when Ueda was working with him on D and Enemy Zero, he was kind of shafted a lot. Like, in interviews, he was asked, like, oh, what'd you do? And he's like, oh, I worked on some of the graphics, but I was always, criticized and stuff by Eno and the team. And you can tell, like, he wasn't appreciated there that much. And it's sad because he had great ideas. And Sony saw that and picked him up and were instantly like, yes, we want you to make stuff with us. And it was interesting kind of seeing like that they took a chance on someone. And I mean, look what happened, and I was reading about Ueda's early inspirations, like from the PlayStation. And he says that Intelligent Cube, which is a interesting little puzzle game, and Paul Rappa the Rapper was another inspiration for him.
Really?
Yeah, because the graphic visual, like the graphic design, and it was cool. Like he definitely has his inspiration from really different and interesting games.
Yeah, areas that you would not think about.
Really.
Yeah, that's such a weird one. Parappa the Rapper. Come on.
I know. When I heard that, I was like, Interesting. I mean, it's a great game. I love that game, but
Yeah, it's kick, punch, it's all in your mind, right? Like I love those titles still.
yeah, and then like going back to where you were saying like they always work on something that goes to the next gen. Last Guardian was the same. I mean, it was announced at E3 in 2009
Yeah.
and it was scheduled for release in 2011, but Ueda had difficulties with Sony and he left, and that's when they formed Gen Design, which is the successor of Team Ico and their little studio. But because they left, the game got pushed back all in 2015. So apparently it would have been able to run on the PS3, but Sony wanted to push it to the 4 so that it could, reach a broader audience. So Sony put in other studios to kind of help out with the code. Japan Studio was a big one. They worked on quite a few big name games like Ape Escape and Gravity Rush.
Great titles. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I still haven't beat Ape Escape or played much of it.
Really?
But I played the demo of it and I really liked it.
I played the hell out of Ape Escape when I was a kid.
It looks like a great time.
Yeah.
But so they helped it, and Last Guardian finally came out after 6 years of it first being announced. And since then, they've just been quiet. And it's interesting looking at the idea for The Last Guardian. And basically, it was all the positive feedback Ueda got from Shadow of the Colossus. Basically, the story between Wonder and the horse, he was like, what if we made a game just focusing on that?
Yeah.
And that's where the creation of Last Guardian came from, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's such a strong concept to pull from. It's the connection between human and animal. Like, I know your connection between you and Rebel is a really strong one, right? So you would do anything there for him. You'd protect him any way you can. Same thing I would do for my two cats, TJ and Diego. Like, constantly, I'm always looking for ways to imbue TJ and Diego into different stories. Because that connection is real. There's a genuine like love there. You feel that love instantly from these creatures.
Oh yeah.
So it makes sense. And I haven't played a lot of Last Guardian. Surprise, surprise, with me being such a fanboy of Team Ico. But I think it came out at the wrong time for me. Unfortunately,
for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was just one of those where I wasn't really playing a lot of games when it came out, and I just haven't really picked it up or tried it again. But looking back at it, I just keep seeing like when you pull the thorn or the spear out of Trico's leg in the beginning, I think about like when my cat Diego got hurt and what I did to make sure he stayed okay and how much he wanted to like bite and scratch at me while I was helping him. But regardless, you still went through that pain to make sure that they got more comfort. And it makes such a strong connection, and it's so grounded in real life. It's just, it's
beautiful.
Yeah. I was trying to find a different word to say than beautiful, but yeah, it's the best way to put it. It's just a beautiful thing. So, yeah.
So after a little discussion of Team Ico, we learned that it's mostly beautiful, artsy games that everyone should play. And we hope you really enjoyed this episode. And we were wondering what the question of the day, well, of the week, I guess you could say. Yeah. And do you have a Team Ico game you like? Have you played any of them? I know most people have played at least one of them, but just give us your thoughts. I'm always kind of interested in people's takes on these games since they're so broad with everything about them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I love these titles so much through and through. They're fantastic little games. They've inspired so much about my future. And I'm sure that there are many people, well, I already know that there are many people and game designers that can say the same thing, that these titles have inspired so many choices that they've made and pushed them in the right direction, or at least the right direction for them. So yeah, like I would love to hear more from you guys. What games did you enjoy? Which ones inspired you to do something different? Or maybe even just like in Rain Over Me, which games might have helped you deal with a situation that would have been a little difficult for you? Or what games resonate with you on that sense? So
Oh, good question.
yeah. So once again, thank you very much for sitting down and listening to us for another week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to do it for us. So yeah. Uh, bye.
Bye.